I think that it's in the mutual interest of countries to reduce tariffs. It's going to require very skillful diplomacy. So we know that in the past, the worst cases of protectionism led to wars.
We all benefit from globalization, but why is the recent protectionist sentiment?
The failure of the US government to share the benefits of globalization with all their citizens. It's not going to be effective. It's not the end of globalization. China has a vital role to play.
And the question today is, are we going to be able to better manage this period of extraordinary technological innovation?
We have a shared village, our planet Earth, and what happens in one place affects us all.
But there are some aspects of globalization which are slowing down and which worry me more deeply than the others. Most worrying is the rising tension between the US and China. There's nothing that is more important. There's no problem in the world that does not require the US and China to cooperate.
Good morning, Mr. Professor. Thank you for your time to join us. First of all, I remember a few months ago, you just mentioned the most worry is the tension between China and the United States. And you say there's no problem in the world doesn't require the US-China cooperation. Is the current situation better or worse than what you expected?
I think the situation is worse than I expected. The escalation of the tariffs that President Trump has introduced has meant that they are higher than we expected.
I was about to, Mr. Professor, do you have any expectations for negotiation in the future between China and the United States? I mean, what will be the trigger point for the negotiation?
Well, I am not in the kitchen to know what's happening. I think there are many potential areas of negotiation. It was interesting to see when I was at the CDF in Beijing in March, there were some corporate leaders from the US, like Tim Cook of Apple, for example. I think that it's in the mutual interest of countries to reduce tariffs, but it's going to require very skillful diplomacy, and it's going to require both sides, I think, wanting to I'm sure China wants lower tariffs. The US has to want lower tariffs too. And there will be discussions of other shared geopolitical interests as well as part of this process. My hope is that happens soon. My hope is it leads to a resumption of much lower tariffs.
The U.S. claimed that the tariffs will bring long-term gains and short-term pains. So who is bearing these short-term pains? And is it possible there are long-term gains at all?
I think the main people that will be bearing the short-term pain are U.S. citizens. Consumers will be paying much higher prices for basic goods, for services. Of course, industries and businesses in the U.S. will be suffering from the supply chain disruptions. Inflation is likely to go up, which means interest rates will stay high, growth will slow, and job creation will slow down. So I think in the first instance, this is very bad for the US economy. But it's also bad for the rest of the world. Trade slows down. It causes much uncertainty for investors around the world. And of course, it has some negative implications for Asia and for China too, because the US is a big export market. It's an investment opportunity. And so this disruption is very negative for the world economy as a whole and for Asia.
So which means there's no long-term gain, just a long-term disaster.
I do not see any positive outcome of this. We know, and that's the reason we've engaged in tariff reforms in the post-Second World War period. We know that trade is good. We know cooperation is good. And I do not see any benefits. What President Trump has been saying, which is this will lead to a restoration of growth in the US economy, is clearly not going to happen as a result of these tariffs. So no, I think this is a very negative tendency.
So, in your opinion, the tariffs from the United States, is the self-defense or just the performing from Trump?
It's difficult to understand what the logic is because it doesn't make sense from an economic perspective. I teach economics, and certainly this is not anything that we would regard as sensible economics. It's not going to be effective. We've seen Trump reversing his policies because of the stock market and because of pressures. So I think we will see continuing uncertainty, but this I do not see as a long-term strategic plan that can succeed. And so the sooner it stops, the better. The protectionism and high walls not only keep out the skills, the investment, the trade, the people we need to build effective economies, whether it's the US or China, we need the sharing to build our great economies. But it also, of course, leads to a growth in mistrust and to tensions which spill over into other areas, like not being able to agree on the many other things we need to do, stopping conflicts, stopping pandemics, and climate change.
Mr. Professor, we all benefit from globalization, but why is this rising protectionist sentiment? What's the root cause?
I think the root cause is the failure of the US government, but also governments in Europe, to share the benefits of globalization with all their citizens. Inequality has grown very sharply in the US, in European countries, not only between the richest people and the poorest people, but also between different places. Some cities have done very well from globalization, and others have been left behind, particularly those with old manufacturing industries. And so we see increasingly geographical differences in what people feel about globalization, and those left behind are angry. They feel that it has not brought benefits, but it's brought risks. The first big risk was the shock of the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. 150 million people around the world lost their jobs and many incomes were reduced. And the second big shock, of course, of globalization has been COVID-19. So people feel that it brings risk, but it does not bring opportunity. And I think the failure of governments to share the benefits is the reason for this, as well as the failure to cooperate to stop these big risks.
So could you please predict the future economic growth in these years?
For China, I think if there's stimulation domestically of consumption and demand, it could achieve 5%. But clearly there are headwinds. It's a very difficult international environment, particularly with the US. But this will spill over to the rest of Asia and the rest of the world economy. I think the world economy will continue to grow at 3% and just over 3%, much slower growth in the US. There could even be a recession in the US. I think Europe 1%. And I think what we'll be seeing in this is a slowing of growth elsewhere as well, particularly in Latin America, due to the contraction of the US market. So it's a year of uncertainty, and this will spill over into investment and trade.
You think there's a financial crisis in China because they're only growing at 5%. Well, we have never achieved that in Europe. It's never been achieved in North America, and I wish we could have that crisis. It would be a very good one for Europe to have.
So based on your vision, how should the world get through this chaotic period as smoothly as possible? Do you have any ideal solutions to stabilize the market and conference?
Well, I think what's happening is an integration within Asia, which is very good. Asia is the most rapidly growing market in the world. The economies are, on the whole, doing very well. And so I think the response of countries should be further integration of the rest of the world. It's a pity the US does not want to be integrated, but there's still 80% of the world's economy that does want to be. And so I think it's important for Asia, for Europe, for Latin America, and for Africa to further their integration through reducing tariffs, through co-investing, through cooperating in multiple ways. And this is going to, I think, lead to a growth in the rest of the world's economy and a slowing of the US economy. So the rest of the world needs to not stop, but get on with its cooperation, with its tariff reductions, with its trade, and with its investment.
So the current global economic and trade system is undergoing a reconstruction and a reassessment. And then how will this adjustment reach a new balance?
Well, I think it's not the end of globalization. Globalization, the flows across national borders will continue. Globalization is alive and well and living in Asia and other parts of the world. So I think what we'll be seeing over this period is the end of the long 80 years of the growth of the supremacy of the US economy in the world, and of course its political influence globally, decline in that, and with this over time, the rise of other powers, of other regions, with Asia and Europe, I think, increasingly taking the lead, but also with the global south, with Africa and Latin America. So I think we see a rebalancing in the world economy and in world politics over this period of time. And this is going to be the Asian century. And so closer integration within Asia, but also between Asia and Europe, Asia and Latin America and Africa, is, I think, going to be even more important than it was in the past.
Asia is the engine of globalization now. There's an irony of history that Europe and North America, the US, had to ask and press Asia to open up. Now they've opened up. They're the advocates of globalization, while Europe is sort of committed and the US much less so.
Professor, is it really possible for us to build a truly global economy system outside the United States? If so, how long and how to?
A global economic system does need to include the United States. You know, it's still the world's biggest economy. It'll soon be the second biggest, but it's a very big share of the global economy and also an important place for innovation, but also important that it cooperates with other countries on the big risks we face. So the first choice is to include the US. But if the US does not want to be included, then I think the rest of the world can make major advances by working together. So it's best if the US is included, but if the US doesn't want to be included, then the rest of us must not stop to keep working hard to improve the benefits of globalization and, of course, to cooperate to solve great problems that we face.
Professor, what's your view on the role China plays and will play in world trade and corporations?
Well, China is extremely significant. There are basically three groups in the world, or three power blocks, the US, China, and Europe, that will determine the future of the global trading system, the world economy, and also cooperation in the world, the managing of the risks. China has a vital role to play. It's now reached a stage of its development where it has the capacity to analyze the issues and to engage with them effectively. And so I think it's extremely important that China continues to play a leadership role in slowing climate change, in stopping pandemics, in stopping financial crisis, to stop crime globally, cross-border crime, and of course, in trying to ensure that the world economy is stable and that we reduce tariffs, that we have free trade between countries on fair terms. And so China has a massive responsibility to play. I think the US's withdrawal reinforces this responsibility because the world, many countries in the world, many citizens in the world are now looking to China to see what response it will have.
I think of the Renaissance as the closest historical period which is similar to today. We celebrate it 500 years later because it was a period of extraordinary genius, of breakthrough, technological breakthroughs. And the question today is, are we going to be able to better manage this period of extraordinary technological innovation?
So as we all know, Professor, many significant technological milestones are the results of global collaboration. So how will protectionism affect the development of such innovations?
Protectionism is bad for the world economy. It's bad for innovation. It's bad for the management of risks. So we know that in the past, the worst cases of protectionism led to wars. The Second World War came out of a spiral of protectionism and the Great Depression. So it's dangerous. It's dangerous politically. It slows growth. It slows innovation. But for the good news is that there's still many, many other places and countries in the world that do want to cooperate. We see cooperation on innovation, on technology between Europe and China, between other countries in Asia and China, and of course, with Latin America and Africa.
So could you please, in your own way, to predict for us the future trends of China's already established positions in the global market, such as artificial intelligence, EV cars, batteries, and solar panel after this street storm?
I think China will continue to grow very significantly. It will increasingly be looking to other markets in Asia and around the world, hopefully also closer integration with Europe. And of course, the domestic market in China is enormous, 1.4 billion people. And as its incomes improve and growth of 4 to 5% a year shared leads to these higher incomes, the potential of internal demand to satisfy the needs of these businesses in terms of sales, I think will continue to grow. So I'm very optimistic that the combination of the levels of education, the technological advances, and the management of domestic demand is going to allow China to weather this terrible storm that the US has created and come out much stronger as a result of it.
What do you think the impact of new technologies like artificial intelligence and nuclear fusions will be in such a time of behavior as this?
Well, AI is clearly advancing extremely rapidly. What DeepSeek has achieved, but many other Chinese AI companies, is quite remarkable. And we'll see this further advancement very rapidly over the coming years. Fusion, of course, is a much more complicated area. Fusion is always 20 years away. And so I'm not that optimistic that we're going to see commercial fusion in the near term. But many other breakthrough technologies like quantum, like nano, like moving to very, very, very low cost energy forms through renewables, through solar, is, I think, very much on the cards for the next 10 years. And this will lead to big breakthroughs, not only in our capacity to analyze, to be productive, but also to cleaner air, to cleaner energy systems. And I believe will make people, human beings, do what human beings are good at. Increasingly repetitive jobs will be done by automated systems, by robotics, by other systems which are AI enhanced, and humans will do what's, I believe, very, very good future, more creative things, which are not so tough on the body and which lead us to have longer, healthier lives.
Professor, how can we enhance the contribution of technological progress to economic growth and improve the world's individual and inequality?
Well, the breakthroughs in medicine are remarkable. I think living longer, healthier lives is very much going to be part of the story. Many of the greatest challenges that humanity has faced in the past, like the diseases, like cancer, like neurodegenerative diseases, will, I believe, be overcome in the coming decades. So we will have longer, healthier lives, and the question is, how will we spend them? So I'm optimistic, but this does require careful thought and planning.
Will the blue collars lose their jobs because of AI technologies, and will this stimulate protectionism in countries like the US?
I think blue-collar workers have already lost their jobs in many economies because of automation. This has been happening for the last 20, 30 years. We see, car factories, auto factories already highly robotized. This will increase in the future. We will see, to the extent they still exist, people working in manufacturing decline, more and more automation. And this does, of course, lead to an increase in populism. It leads to growth in protectionism and anti-globalization. But that depends on what governments do. If people can find new jobs, often in new places, then they do not reject these changes. And so the key is flexible labor markets, affordable housing, transport systems, and other things that allow people to move from old jobs to new jobs. And as AI increasingly takes old jobs, this will become more and more important.
Unemployed people are not happy people. People on stagnating incomes are not happy people. They get angry, understandably so. And as technology increasingly encroaches on jobs of people doing repetitive, rules-based work, this becomes more and more important.
Do you think manufacturing industry will truly back to United States?
No, not as we knew it in the past. Manufacturing increasingly will be robotic. Even and to the extent it's low cost, it's much more located in low-cost labor locations. The U.S. is a high-cost economy. Labor is high cost. And so the idea of people, for example, manufacturing iPhones in the U.S., I think, is a dream. If it's done, it will be done by machines. Automated systems, yes. The price of capital is cheap in the U.S., so automation is not that difficult to do in the U.S., but it will not be a manufacturing like in the past, employing lots of blue-collar workers in the places they used to be employed in. This would be a new manufacturing, highly automated, with a lot of AI enhancement, often in new places to the places the jobs used to be.
So can we return to area of the global village? What kind of world should be expect and built?
Well, in many respects, we're already in a global village. What happens in one place affects the whole world. We see this with climate change. We see this with pandemics. And so we are all very connected. We entangled. Our lives around the world are hyperconnected, from the poorest villages to the richest cities. And this sense of coming together brings with it an incredible opportunity to share the benefits, but also responsibility to act more carefully, because what we do wherever we are affects people elsewhere. And so a greater understanding of this entanglement, of our connectivity, is, I believe, important. And that's at the individual level, it's the city level, at the company level, and certainly at the country level, at the government level. And so we need, as we think about the future, increasingly to recognize that we have a shared village, our planet Earth, and what happens in one place affects us all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor.